You're listening to Mike Adams and Chris Savory, the record collectors from the BBC, between now and 9 tonight.
1 2 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. You have it on slow then. Just ignore me. I just want to hear you talk naturally as you were. Get Mike rattle little racket. Just don't touch the cables.
Well, our guest today on the Record Collectors programme in deepest Wales at the Pwllheli holiday camp is none other than Mike Berry, famous for his association with a group called the Admirals and the Innocents and the Outlaws, of course. His career spans 3 decades, and we're able now to perhaps ask the questions and find the truth behind the man and his music and his acting. Welcome to the Record Collectors programme, Mike. Can we tell our listener where you started in music, and where did it begin, and what were your early influences?
Your listener, did you say, in the singular?
Yeah.
Let me just correct you on the Admirals. The Admirals that you mentioned are, in fact, the Outlaws, and that was just either a misprint or it was somebody misunderstood it over the phone, so that's how these things happen. But, now, what was the question again?
Take two. And we're with Mike Berry in Pwllheli in North Wales, and I'd like to ask Mike, the first question is, where did you start musically? What were your first influences?
My very first influences were records my sister bought, because my sister, who lives in the States now, is 6 years older than me, and she used to mix with American servicemen and all those sort of guys who brought American records over, which I can't even remember half of them, but people like Bonnie Lou I would hear records of. But the earliest influences really were people like Guy Mitchell, Frankie Lane, Joe Stafford, and those people, because they were sort of just pre-rock and roll, just before Bill Haley and Elvis. And they were my early influences in that I used to sit and listen to these records at parties that my sister used to throw, and with all their boyfriends and my other sister. I had 2 older sisters. And I used to sit in the corner in my short trousers listening to all these wonderful records and looking at these people kissing and all the rest, dancing and all the rest of it. But the music stuck in my mind, and it was all that sort of it was even early 50s, wasn't it? Frankie Lane, I think, sort of went back to early 50s. And they were my first influences. And I used to try and impersonate people like Frankie Lane and Johnny Ray in my bedroom when nobody was in. And I seem to remember that I didn't do too bad a job, because my friends used to say I sounded like these different people. And so they were my earliest influences. Then, of course, later, when I got into skiffle, and Lonnie Donegal and people like that, and I'm trying to think, there weren't any American skiffle artists or artists that were in the same area as Lonnie Donegal. It was the Vipers and those sort of people. And because that inspired me and a few friends to form a skiffle group called the Rebels. And
where was this exactly? Whereabouts in the country are we when this is taking place?
This was in North London, in an area called Finsbury Park, near Manor House, which is N4. And the guys involved were the guys that lived in some flats where I moved from flats into a house just across the road in Gloucester Drive. And we used to go and sit on the bench down on the corner and sort of just sing these songs. And I played washboard, and I got this because you could buy washboards brand new then, and I bought this brand new metal washboard, which is if anyone doesn't know what a washboard is, it's a corrugated piece of steel in a wooden frame with a couple of little legs on it. And I used to sit the legs on my hips and have a bit of string through the ends of the board, the washboard, and then round my neck, so it sort of stuck out in front of me, if you can imagine that. And
you were a pro then, a real pro.
Oh, well, I mean, about pro. I wasn't actually paid too much. And I used to stick thimbles on my fingers. Some of them used to have gloves with chains on. They tried all different things. And I used to have to sing over this racket I was making, because I was the singer with the band, and the drummer, in effect. And then we had a couple of guitars, acoustic guitars, which were dreadful guitars. They really were. And then the T-chest bass, which this guy Terry Liddington, I remember, played T-chest bass, and it used to have the Rebels on the side, and it used to have all these hands and feet painted on it, and it was great. I mean, it wasn't that, because with a T-chest bass, it's such a vague sound, it's just sort of bass notes, but no real notes, if you know what I mean.
What was the one piece of music during that period of time, particularly with the band, because that you thought we played this well, and the record itself was a good one?
Well, yeah, funnily enough, that it wasn't a skiffle tune, because we used to do sort of Rock Island Line and stuff like that, and Don't You Rock Me Daddy and those sort of things. But even then, I thought, no, these songs aren't quite right. They were a bit sort of jugga, and there was no way, they weren't going anywhere. And then we heard Boney Maroney by Larry Williams, and I bought that on a 78, and I played it until if you remember the old 78, as you played them, they used to go grey.
They did, yeah.
Because you played them so much, and the other side was You Bug Me Baby, and we used to do both those songs. And
Cliff did a copy of that much later, didn't he? You Bug Me Baby.
I think a lot of guys do. Yeah, I didn't know if he actually recorded it, but it was a good song. But that was the thing those days, that both sides of the record were always great. But we used to do Boney Maroney, and the thing that makes it stick in my mind, more than Larry Williams, who was wonderful and one of my favourite singers, was that one of the guitarists, I'll call him a lead guitarist, but he was just another rhythm. We only had rhythm guitarists in the skiffle group. He used to do the sax part, and if you remember on the record, it used to go da 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 da, and he used to sing it with his most awful voice. And we used to go, I got a girl named Boney Maroney, and he used to go, just like, it was always like some Coleman, you know. Oh God. Anyway, he used to do this, and we used to just do this song, and I used to just suffer him making this racket, and that's what made me remember that song. But it was a great record anyway.
And here is Boney Maroney. If you just join us, we're in the middle of a conversation here with Mike Berry, talking about his early days and early influences. From then, you went on to form the band which eventually recorded with Joe Meek. But the big stage from playing in skiffle to formal rock and roll, how did that come about? And of course, your association with what now is a legendary band, the Outlaws. It was obviously a major move, both musically and career-wise, as it turned out. Were you the person behind this, or was it sort of like the fate lent a hand, or what happened?
Well, I was the person behind it in that prior to the Outlaws, I had a band after the skiffle group, and I'd started to play guitar a bit, and I was now getting into Buddy Holly, and everybody said you should go and get a record deal because you used to do Buddy Holly songs really well, and I thought, yeah, wonderful stuff. 16, you think all that, and so. But anyway, to cut a long story short, after the skiffle group, I got a band together through this guy called Mick Taplin. I don't know why I remember all these names. And they actually had electric guitars, but with sort of 10-watt amps and stuff like that, you know, these terrible old Hofner President guitars. And we had one drum. There was a snare drum on a stand and one cymbal. I think it was a hi-hat, actually, and that was the drummer's kit. And
you were rich.
Oh, yes. Well, in fact, they did come from fairly wealthy families. The bass player and myself were the peasants. But the other three guys in the band, the drummer, the rhythm guitar, and the lead guitar, came from Italian families, and they were all quite flush businessmen. And anyway, that was the first band, and we made a demo record, and through a guy called Peter Raymond, I got involved with Joe Meek, with that band.
This is important to our listener because they're such purists, and I have to ask this demonstration record, where was it recorded, and do you still have it?
I do. Actually, my mother has the copy, and my mother lives in Bangor, in North Wales, actually, which we're not far from. But she has one of the original lacquers. It was just a lacquer. And we recorded it in somebody's front room in Wandsworth, South London, where I now live, actually, in a Magdalen Road, and the guy who recorded it was a guy called John Hawkins, who used to work, funnily enough, with Joe Meek at IBC. And this was all, I didn't know anything about this because I was still working in the print at the time when we made this demo record. And anyway, from this demo, which the songs included Please Don't Tease, Bebop-A-Lula, Dream Lover, and Peggy Sue Got Married. And this guy, Peter Raymond, who I met through somebody I was working with, heard the record and really liked it, came to see the band where we used to rehearse in Soho at one of this Italian club because of the influence of the guys in the band. And he took the record to Joe Meek and also to Jack Good, you know, who did Oh Boy and all that. And they both wanted to sign me up on the strength of the record, particularly on the Peggy Sue Got Married song because of the Holly thing. And that's how I sort of started with Joe, and I went to see him and all the rest of it. But the Outlaws came quite a bit later.
Can we talk about your first meeting with Joe Meek, or the first few meetings with Joe Meek? Because at the moment, there's so much going on. The John Repsch book, The Legendary Joe Meek, and of course the Arena programme on BBC television a few weeks back has caused a lot of reinterest on probably, most people call the Telstar man, but he was probably the first true independent producer in this country who did his own thing regardless. We've heard a lot of the negative things about Joe Meek. What are the sort of positive sides to Joe Meek?
Well, basically, he was a nice bloke. I don't think he ever meant anybody any harm. He was very mixed up because of his sexual problems. I mean, I call it problems. It wasn't problems at all. The only problem was that it was the social scene didn't allow for gay people, and he was gay, and it was very difficult. And gays were persecuted then and still are persecuted now, it seems, by the authorities just for being the way they are. And because Joe had no real interest in women whatsoever. But that was only one side of it. The other side of it was, I believe, and it's only since reading John Repsh's book and finding out so much more about Joe Meek than I knew when I was with him, is that I think he was bordering on genius. I think the man really was way ahead of his time. When you think he actually built one of the first televisions in the country out of bits and pieces and an old cathode ray tube. It's incredible. That man was just so bright. But as I say, basically, he was a nice guy. He was very shy. He was very enthusiastic about the people he worked with. He wanted total loyalty. He would be very loyal if you gave him total loyalty. And he was very good at his job, in fact, brilliant at his job of recording people in an unusual way and getting different sounds and sounds that hadn't been done before, and pushing back the barriers of the rules, if you like, of the recording engineers and studios. So he had a lot going for him, Joe. I mean, the fact that he was volatile was all part of his genius, and he used to throw things at people because they annoyed him. Half the time it's because he saw through them. He saw that they were only in the business for money, and he didn't approve.
Was his aim to actually be totally different and really take popular music into avenues it hadn't gone before? Was he paranoid? I mean, was he sort of like suspicious of everything? I mean, where have you been, who you've seen? Have you taken the tapes anywhere? Was he covetous? I mean, how was he with you?
I wasn't with him long enough to find out. See, when I was with him, he used to almost jokingly say, the people listening, they're all trying to pinch my ideas, and he at the time, I'm sure he was just joking. But it developed into a paranoia that was very serious in the end, and that was part of his downfall. And I think people did try and copy it. They saw his sounds were successful. They forgot about all the flops that he had, because he had so many more flops than hits. But it doesn't matter. There are plenty of people that only ever have flops, whereas he didn't. He took the bull by the horns and went his own way, and he had all these huge hits. And I think in the end, people did start thinking, perhaps this chap's got something, a bit like Phil Spector in his way. But they couldn't really copy him because they didn't have the facilities or the freedom that he had. They were all either people that had the ideas but no studio, or they had the studios and so they've had very fixed ideas and were held by regulations. But they also didn't have the talent and the imagination that Joe had. He was a very imaginative person.
There's a record that you cut with him which is very much sought after today. It appeared on an extended play. It was a hit, I think, in around about 62. I haven't got the figures in front of me. It went to 23 or something like that. And then it was reissued around about 68, was even a bigger hit, a tribute to Buddy Holly, and was a major hit in Germany. Can you tell us, I don't know if those facts are absolutely perfect, but can you tell us how that recording came about, and a little bit about the choice of that record and the obvious influences and what it did to your life, because that got a lot of airplay and it was a very successful record, and I expect you still sing it today, that particular track.
Yeah, well, in fact, it at the time, it didn't get any airplay. It was banned. The only place it got airplay was on Red Luxembourg, of course. So, that's right, yeah.
I've lost my job on this station.
And but the song was 61, I think it was actually a hit, and I was still working in a music shop in Hackney called Berry's, funnily enough, which is a famous piano maker, Berry's Pianos. And I'd left the print, or at least I'd been sort of more or less asked to leave because I was getting into work late from singing gigs, and they said you've got to either sing or do your apprenticeship as a printer. And Joe Meek said, give your job up. Very responsible. So I gave up this amazing career that I was about to have and went into the singing side of things. And I had to get a job straight away, and I got it in this piano shop. Anyway, what I was about to say was that when I was walking up Mare Street, which is one of the main streets in Hackney, looking at the New Musical Express, which was the Bible at the time, there I was in the charts. And I didn't even know about this. I knew something was happening because there was a bit of a buzz.
30, and you went from 20 to 30, and then you came in.
Something like that, yeah. But the song came about. Jeff Goddard and Joe Meek conceived the idea of a tribute to Buddy Holly because they were both absolutely Buddy Holly potty. I mean, even more so than I. And I was the obvious choice to sing it, and they wrote it, or Jeff and Joe. I can't remember who played what part as far as writing is concerned. It may have actually been just Jeff, but anyway, they had it with me in mind. And of course, Jeff Goddard always used to do these demos of songs, and wonderful demos, because he used to sort of, like Errol Garner, the way he plays jazz and mumbles. Yeah. Well, Jeff Goddard sort of plays tunes, and he sort of plays the piano. You can hear this mumbling Wild Wind or whatever it was he wrote. Yeah, and Tribute was the same sort of thing, and he would give you the demo.
I said Burt Bacharach somehow. He's the same with his.
A
little bit, yeah.
But with Jeff, I mean, in fact, up until very recently, I used to sing the wrong words. There's snow or snow. On the second verse, is it the second verse? Hang on a second. No, I'm thinking of the other. I'm thinking of another song. I'm thinking of "Don't You Think It's Time," which they also wrote. There's a line goes, "Hey, hey, baby, can't you hear the church bells?" No, hey, baby, I hear the church bells chime. They keep saying, "Hey, hey, baby." Boom, boom, baby, I thought it was, and it wasn't. It's hold on, baby. And because of the way, the point I'm trying to make again is because of the way Jeff Goddard used to mumble, I couldn't hear the word, and I thought he said boom, boom, baby. Because I was thinking of the church bell ringing, and it was in fact he was saying hold on, baby. But anyway, he and Joe wrote tribute, and we got the Buddy Holly Appreciation Society along to the studio to hear it before it was released, because Joe wanted them to give it their stamp of approval,
and they did.
And they did. Quite right.
Which was quite amazing. Was John Beecher amongst that crowd?
John Beecher publishes my songs now. Yes, he lives in Gloucester, and John was
been on our programme, John.
Has he? Yes, because heavily involved with the Crickets, who are on here later today. So
Don't You Think It's Time was on HMV, wasn't it?
That's right.
That
yes.
was very Buddy Holly. Was there a song called Loneliness on the other side of that? Loneliness.
Yes, that's right.
Did you write
yes.
that? Co-wrote?
No, I didn't. No, that was Joe. No, I think that was Joe. It may have been under a pseudonym.
That's right. Yeah.
Because he used to write a lot of stuff under the pseudonym, so they didn't have to pay the royalties to other people. He didn't have to pay his partner then.
I think we've got to play this tribute to Buddy Holly now, because our listeners are saying, where is this song?
Go on,
and we'll play the original one, and here it is. Welcome back, and that, of course, was tribute to Buddy Holly with our special guest tonight, which is Mike Berry. Moving on from that period...
See, there's an example on that record of Joe's heavy use of what they call a compressor, a sound compressor, which nobody would ever have used. He used it almost as an effect.
Can we just check it out? At the end of the record, I'd like to just bring that in.
Oh.
And that was Mike Berry's legendary track, a tribute to Buddy Holly. Anything special about the recording techniques used on that record, Mike?
Well, yes, but not just on that record, but on other records. But on that one particularly, you can hear the compressor, because in music they use what they call a compressor, which literally does as it says. It compresses all the music into a narrower band, so you can have more apparent loudness on tape, and which will then still stay on the record. And you can actually hear between the notes. You can hear this sort of thing sucking. It makes a sort of a breathing sound. And Joe used that far more than any engineer would ever have allowed, and so therefore that was another reason they couldn't get the sounds, because they didn't want to break the rules. He broke the rules and succeeded. It was on all those Johnny Remember Me, all the John Layton records and Telstar, all those records he used heavily compressed, and it got that big fat sound without actually overloading it.
Did you record anything with Joe Meek that hasn't come to light? Is there any recordings or anything you did with the Outlaws that we haven't heard yet?
Yes, there's a song apparently called "It's an Upside Down Old World," and I can only remember this by the dreadful title, and I have a feeling it was a dreadful recording and dreadfully sung. So please,
you don't know
God,
the melody was that like?
It's an upside down old world without no living. It's an upside down old world. I think that's about all I can remember, but it was the pits, and it was as bad as some of the other records that did come out that I hated as well. But it's a typical sort of Joe song. Joe used to write some dreadful songs and make you do them. It was awful. But there were a load of songs we recorded that day. They came to see to hear the tribute record. We recorded almost all day Buddy Holly songs. The Outlaws and I were there, and we recorded Buddy Holly songs, which are on tape somewhere. In fact, I think I know who's got them, but he won't let them out, and they are around.
Right. I did know one or two people wanting royalties, so they're hanging on to these things, aren't they?
Well, it's not. I think it's not so much that. I think there's just. I don't know why they won't let them go, because they do belong to the artists. They deserve them back as masters, even if they don't use them. I'd like them back just for my archive, you see. But we can't get them, and I'm not sure what the problem. I think it's because Joe Meek's estate is still being tied up, and it's not actually after. It's 1967.
You're split with Joe Meek. I mean, how did it come about? You seem to have a reasonable relationship with him, and then you parted ways. Was that prior to him committing suicide?
Well, Joe actually prophesied my split with him, because when Robert Stigwood, who people may or may not know, was a very big manager and still is huge at this time.
It's associated with the Bee Gees, don't they?
That's right now, but at the time he managed John Layton and got Mike Sarn and had a whole stable of people. But Robert Stigwood had heard me perform, and I toured with John Layton on John's first tour when Tribute had been a hit. And he wanted to sign me up as a manager. And he said to Joe, like, you can still record him, but I want to sign him up. And Joe told me this and said, look, Robert Stigwood wants to sign you up. And when he went bananas, I thought, wonderful stuff. And he said, now he'll try and take you away from me. And what he meant was he will take you away from me, because sure enough he did. Robert Stigwood said, look, you know, we made a couple of we had Don't You Think It's Time, which was a hit, and then a couple of records. My Little Baby was another hit, but not as big, and Robert Stigwood didn't approve of the track, and nor did I, actually. And then when the next record came along and didn't do anything, called It Really Doesn't Matter, which again was just, he tried to recapture the Don't You Think It's Time sound. Robert Stigwood said, right, that's enough. He said, I'm going to take you away from Joe. And he obviously had words with him and leaned on him some way, because I was still contracted to Joe. And I left Joe Meek, and I don't think I saw him again. I don't think I even saw him to say goodbye or anything.
The next one was This Little Girl, wasn't it? That was your follow-up single to that.
No, that was a B-side.
B-side?
That was the B-side of... Ooh.
That was on HMV as well?
Yes, I don't know what was that the B-side of? I don't remember.
On My Mind.
On My Mind. The self-penned On My Mind.
Are you proud of that one?
I am. That's a good song. We should have done that today.
I see. If I can find a copy of it, I don't have a copy of my own collection, but if I've got a copy of On My Mind, I'll put it in at this moment. As you can see, we didn't have a copy of that record. so we're moving on. I'll have BBC Archives for it. I might get it. I just might get it. I've got to edit this, Adams. Can we talk about the Outlaws? And they went away around about '64 with Gene Vincent, of course, didn't they? Did you know Gene Vincent personally?
No, I didn't. I don't think I ever even met him. I think I may have worked on the same show, but we never actually met. But the Outlaws. Let me think, because you know Joe named the Outlaws, and he named me Mike Berry because of Holly Berry. My name was Kenny Lord before Mike Berry. Kenny Lord and the Statesmen. Well, the Statesmen were given the elbow. That was the Italians, and Peter Raymond knew the Outlaws, who were in fact the Stormers. It was Billy Gray and the Stormers, and they kicked Billy Gray out. I think they didn't really want to, but they saw the chance of getting a record deal, and I was it, because I already had the deal. Joe wasn't concerned about anybody else. And he said to this Peter Raymond, if you can get a good band, then go and get them. And so he got this band, and because it was Chaz Hodges and all the rest of the Outlaws, people won't necessarily know, but Chaz is with Chaz and Dave, of course. So that's how the Outlaws came about. Their name was changed to the Outlaws. I became Mike Berry, and we stayed together for only a couple of years, actually, I think. And then Robert Stigwood sacked the Outlaws. They were supposed to do that tour I mentioned with John Layton, and they went to the wrong rehearsal place by accident, and so consequently they got to the rehearsal late, and Robert Stigwood didn't even ask, he just sacked them on the spot. And I think there was some connivance between him and Joe, because Joe Meek wanted the Tornadoes to do this tour, who'd been formed around Hines, because the Outlaws wouldn't let Hines join the Outlaws. The idea was to get rid of the lead guitarist, a guy called Bill Kye. Chaz Hodges was going to play lead guitar, and Hines was going to become the bass player, and they all said no way, because Hines wasn't up to it, and he wasn't. The Outlaws were the best band around, and they were.
They're legendary now, of course. They're very much sought after, and they're an extremely collectible band.
Yes, and rightly so, because they were a good band.
Can we move on quickly, because we're running out of time here? Around about 1966, you went into manufacturing, or something to do with Motor Racing World. Can you?
69.
Was it 69? Okay, yeah. 1969. Now, also, you appeared in Repertory. This is it reminds me a little bit. Adam Faith had a bit of a similar sort of like moves, didn't he, about this period of time? He did one or two films, and like Oh What a Whopper, and because he did Beat Girl before that. And you, of course, went on to appear in television sit comedies. How did this come about?
Well, it was really through, needs must when the devil drives, because I'd gone through quite a bad patch as a solo artist when I wasn't getting a great deal of singing work, and there was an agency started up for modelling, and I went to see them, and they took me on. Basically, they didn't know who I was, which was a bit of an insult. They said, "Who are you? What do you do?" And so I told them, and they said, "Okay, we'll take you on." So, and over that next 10 years, it was. From about 1970-71 up to 1980, I was probably the busiest model regarding commercials and all that in the country, And
never off the box.
Exactly. I made about 50 commercials, all featured commercials, and so it didn't stop. And I was into jingles and all the rest of it, singing.
Writing the jingles as well.
I wrote for Fresh Cream and pizzas and stuff like this, and that was all sort of grist for the mill and just all wages, really. But they just sort of snowballed. I just picked up these things.
Your acting abilities and your comedy abilities, and Are You Being Served? Have you any ambitions left as an actor? Any things you'd like to do?
I've got a great ambition at the moment. I've written or co-written a situation comedy, which I'm hoping that Auntie BBC may take on, and it's really it started out autobiographically, and in some ways, in that it was based on my knowledge of the pop music scene, but it's gone away from there, and it's now about an agent with lots of dodgy acts, and it's the series is called Don't Give Up Your Day Job. And it's very aptly named regarding the acts that this guy Monty's got, who's an agent. And there's a part in it for me which I like to do, which is the sort of the has-been pop singer, which is maybe typecasting, but in fact is not, because there's very little in the way of music. But what is in there is going to be good rock and roll.
Of course, you're involved with the Buddy Holly movie that's just come out, or the which is just actually around the cinemas now. And of course, your hits didn't stop in the 60s. You start to have hits again in the 80s, which must have been a delight for you. I mean, having had that sort of the gap.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, the hit again through Chaz Hodges. I rang Chaz up one day because I'd been recording and not getting anywhere, and I'd spoken to the record company, and to cut a long story short, he said he'd produce me, and the record company okayed it, and he came up with one song, and I sent him a dozen of my songs, and he picked 3 of mine, and the one he came up with, he said, I'd like you to record this, he said, because I think it suits your voice, because Chaz and I have got very similar voices and range. And he said, Dave and I, Chaz and Dave, do it on the road, and it goes down very well, and I think it could do well. So he picked this song, and we recorded it, and I didn't know it. I thought, oh well, I mean, maybe you know, and I didn't think anything much of it, and it was released and became a huge hit.
And that song was
The Sunshine of Your Smile.
That was a conversation with Mike Berry on behalf of the Collectors Programme. Mike, every success, strength to your elbow, and we didn't even talk about the compact disc, did we?
No, I do rabbit on a bit, but I'll get you another day. There's the episode 2 of the Mike Berry saga to come. Cheers, bye.